Snow had been falling over Chicago since before dawn, the kind that does not ask permission, that simply arrives and covers everything that came before it. By the time the city woke, Lincoln Park wore a white coat over its iron fences, and its empty benches and the alley behind Hargrove Coffee on Fullerton Avenue was no different. Everything was muffled. Everything was still, except for the small sound of aluminum against aluminum. Lily Ward was 7 years old and she was counting. Her lips moved with each can she lifted, forming numbers the way other children form prayers, carefully, quietly, as though the wrong word might break the spell. Her mittens had holes in 3 fingers. Her cheeks were the color of winter roses. But her eyes were sharp and bright, the eyes of a child who has learned that attention is a form of survival. 28, 29, 30. She turned toward her mother, who stood a few steps back, keeping watch. Her small breath made a cloud in the cold air. If I get 10 more, I have enough for Grandma's scarf. The soft kind. The blue one. Celeste Ward did not answer right away. She pressed her knuckles against her mouth for just a moment, the way a person does when they are deciding which version of themselves to be. Then she smiled, the kind of smile that costs something. She will love it, sweetheart. Celeste was 29 years old. She had the posture of someone who had been carrying more than her share for a long time and had decided somewhere along the way to carry it without letting it show. Her dark hair was pulled back. Her coat was clean but old, the hem repaired twice at the bottom. Her boots left careful tracks in the snow. She had been awake since before 5 in the morning, when she had risen quietly in the dark apartment on West Wrightwood and made Lily's lunch and braided her daughter's hair by the yellow light above the kitchen sink before the first of her 3 jobs began. 3 years. That was how long Celeste had been doing this. 3 years since the phone call. 3 years since the police officer at her door with his hat in his hands and his rehearsed expression of sorrow. 3 years since Thomas Voss had been driving home on I-90 on a wet October night, his phone pressed to his ear, calling her, and the semi-truck had come through the red light at the Costner Avenue interchange without slowing. She still had the voicemail. She had never deleted it. 3 seconds of breath, and then nothing. What had followed the funeral was not grief, not exactly. It was a different thing. It was the Voss family lawyers arriving at her door 9 days after they buried her husband with a set of documents she did not understand, and a man in a gray suit who explained with practiced sympathy that under the terms of Thomas's employment contract with the Voss Group, a morality and continuity clause had been triggered, and that all shared assets, the apartment on Lakeview, the joint accounts, the life insurance policy, the investment portfolio, Thomas had built over 8 years of 18-hour days, were being redirected into the family trust under Gerald Voss's sole authority. She had tried to fight it. She had found a lawyer, a young woman on the north side, who believed her and was willing to take the case. The lawyer had called her 3 weeks later, her voice strange and tight, and said she could no longer represent her. She had not explained why. Celeste had understood. The only thing they could not take was the trust fund. Thomas had set it up before they married, ironclad, irrevocable, $7 million in Lily's name, accessible only when Lily turned 18. Even the Voss family lawyers had gone quiet when Celeste's own attorney pointed to that document. It was the one thing Thomas had made untouchable. Celeste had since learned through a source she trusted that Gerald Voss had recently instructed his CFO to begin exploring legal mechanisms to reclassify the trust. She did not know how far that had gone. She knew she had to be careful. A woman in a camel coat came down the alley from the street side, her small boy in tow, both of them in matching cashmere scarves. The boy stopped. He pointed at Lily with the guileless cruelty of a child who has not yet learned to hide his feelings. His mother looked. She did not whisper. She wanted to be heard. "Don't look at her, honey. Stay away. God knows what she's carrying." The woman walked on. The boy looked back once over his shoulder and then was gone. Lily had heard. Celeste watched her daughter lower the can slowly, the way a child lowers something she has just been told she should not be holding. Then Lily looked up at her mother. Her expression was not wounded. It was something more careful than that. "It is okay, Mama. I just want to help a little." She picked up the can again and put it in the bag. Celeste turned her face and let the tears fall inside her collar, where Lily could not see them. Not because she was weak, because she wasn't. Because she had made a private rule 3 years ago that she would never let her daughter see despair without a plan behind it. She had plans. She always had plans. They were just very small plans, built one aluminum can at a time. That evening, walking home through the quiet streets, they stopped in front of Colton's Steakhouse on North Clark. Not because Celeste meant to, her feet simply forgot to keep moving. Through the tall front window, gold light spilled onto the sidewalk, and inside, at the long mahogany table surrounded by silver candlesticks and red poinsettias, sat the Voss family. Eleanor Voss, silver-haired and straight-backed, holding Fletcher on her knee and feeding him spoonfuls of something that caught the candlelight. Gerald Voss with a glass of Bordeaux raised. Prescott Voss in a dark suit leaning back laughing. Bellamy, his wife, in a dress the color of garnets, her manicured hand resting on the rim of a champagne flute. A Christmas tree taller than the chandelier stood in the corner, throwing reflections onto their faces. Not one of them had called. Not one card. Not one inquiry about the child who carried their blood in their name. A couple stopped beside Celeste at the glass, unaware of who she was. The woman murmured to her companion, "That is the Voss family, real estate dynasty. They own half of the Gold Coast." Celeste tightened her grip on Lily's hand and turned to go, but Lily did not move. Her small face was pressed almost to the glass, her breath fogging a perfect circle on the cold pane. She was staring at the boy on Eleanor's knee. She was staring at the empty chair. Then she looked up at her mother with eyes that were too old for 7. "Mama, why can't we go inside?" Celeste opened her mouth. She closed it again. She took her daughter's hand and walked home without answering, because some truths take longer than a winter night to carry. The apartment on West Wrightwood had been beautiful once, in the way that buildings are beautiful when someone still believes in them. The 4th floor of a brownstone that had given up on itself, the kind of place where the radiator knocked twice before giving up on cold nights. Celeste unlocked the door with a key that stuck every December, and the first thing that greeted them was the particular cold that lives in walls that have not been warmed by enough hands. She lit the gas burner and stood with her palms over the blue flame until she could feel her fingers again. Lily disappeared behind the sheet that divided the living room, the corner they called her room, and came back dragging the rusted cookie tin from under the bed. "Look, Mama, I counted last night. $43. That is enough for Grandma's scarf and maybe something for Grandpa, too." Celeste looked at the tin, at the creased bills and the coins, at her daughter's face, which contained no irony and no bitterness, only the pure arithmetic of a child who believes that love can be measured in saved-up things. On the counter behind her, 3 envelopes waited. 2 were red, past due electric, past due water. The third was cream-colored, heavy, embossed with a crest she recognized. She had already opened it. She knew what it said. "Mrs. Celeste Ward, you are hereby required to present Miss Lily Ward at the 80th birthday celebration of Mrs. Eleanor Voss on the evening of December 22nd at the Voss residence on Astor Street. Attendance is mandatory for purposes of familial presentation. Signed office of Hallbrook Vance Attorney at Law." Mandatory. Celeste had read the word 3 times, not invited, required, not because Eleanor missed Lily, because Eleanor needed a grandchild in a pretty dress for a press photographer from the Tribune Society column. She knew this. She understood it completely. She also understood something else, something that had taken her the better part of 3 years to accept. Lily was 7, and at 7, a child is still capable of believing that a grandmother's love is something that can be earned with the right gift and the right dress and enough patience. Celeste opened her mouth to tell her daughter the truth, that this was theater, that Eleanor needed a grandchild in a pretty dress for a press photographer, not a granddaughter she had chosen to love. But she looked at Lily's face at the hope they're careful and patient and entirely real, and she closed her mouth again. Some truths could wait one more day. That was why she would go. Not for Eleanor, not for appearances. For the 7-year-old who had spent $43 of aluminum cans buying her grandmother a blue scarf. The morning of December 22nd arrived gray and clear, the sky over Lincoln Park, the color of old pewter. Celeste woke at 5 and braided Lily's hair by the kitchen light. The dress Lily wore had been made over 3 late evenings from the lining of a winter coat Celeste had repaired for a client, a woman who had thrown the scraps in the bin without looking twice. The dress was soft pink, the satin ribbon at the waist tied by Celeste's careful hands. It was the most beautiful thing in the room. From under the bed, Lily retrieved the gift. Wrapped in newspaper, she had decorated with red crayon tied with a piece of ribbon saved from a package that had arrived at school. Inside, the blue scarf, the soft kind, bought that morning with the $43 from the tin. "Are you ready?" Celeste asked. Lily held the box against her chest and nodded. The Voss estate on Astor Street stood at the top of the block like a cathedral that had decided to become a home. 5 stories of limestone wreaths on every window, a uniformed doorman under a heated awning, black cars lining both curbs. Celeste gave her name. The doorman's eyes moved over her coat, her shoes, her daughter, and something shifted in his expression that was not quite welcome. Inside, Eleanor waited in the foyer in emerald silk and a triple strand of diamonds that caught the chandelier light like falling water. She saw them cross the threshold, and her perfectly maintained expression did not change. She noted Celeste's coat. She noted the newspaper-wrapped box in Lily's hands. "You are late," she said. "Use the service entrance next time. The guests do not need to watch this." Lily did not hear the instruction embedded in those words. She heard only that she was there at her grandmother's house on her grandmother's birthday. She broke from her mother's hand and ran forward with the box held out in both palms, her face luminous, with the specific hope of children who have not yet learned to protect themselves from disappointment. "Grandma, I brought you a present. I picked it myself." Eleanor glanced at the newspaper-wrapped package. She took it by one corner the way one handles something uncertain and placed it on the marble side table without looking at it. "Put it with the others, dear. Grandma already has Fletcher to spoil her. She does not need anything else." Lily's hand was still extended. She lowered it slowly. Fletcher appeared from behind the staircase, sliding across the marble in his velvet suit, and shoved his wrist under Lily's nose. "Look what Grandma got me. It is a real Rolex, $8,000. Yours is a scarf right from a dumpster." Celeste pulled Lily to her side and walked her into the ballroom before the expression on her daughter's face could finish forming. 40 guests, crystal and candlelight, and the quiet murmur of people who have never had to worry about the electric bill. Celeste kept her hand on Lily's shoulder as they found their place near the far end of the table, away from the centerpiece, away from the photographers moving along the room's perimeter. The first course came and went. Prescott stood between the soup and the fish and tapped his champagne flute. Friends, partners, family. He was looking at Fletcher across the table. "Tonight I am proud to announce that Voss Group's future has a name. Fletcher Voss, my son, the next heir of everything my father built." Applause moved through the room like a current. Lily looked up at her mother. Her voice was very small. "Mama, what about Daddy? Daddy was the oldest son, wasn't he?" Bellamy, seated 3 chairs away, laughed the bright, caring laugh of a woman who has never once considered restraint. "Oh, sweetie, your daddy is dead. Dead sons do not inherit. And granddaughters. Please. A little dumpster girl running a real estate empire?" The table laughed with her. One woman lifted her hand to cover her smile. Lily's cheeks went scarlet. She dropped her eyes to her plate and kept them there, her hands folded in her lap, small and still. Gerald walked past her chair on his way to refill his scotch. He did not look at her. He stopped beside Fletcher, ruffled his hair with a warm grandfather's hand, and murmured something that made the boy grin. The main course came and went. Lily did not touch her plate. It was Eleanor who noticed the necklace was missing. She rose halfway from her chair, one gloved hand against her throat, where the Voss family emerald had rested against her collarbone all evening. The room went still. "My emerald. It is gone." The word moved through the guests in a low wave. The photographer stopped moving. Bellamy was on her feet before anyone else. Her red lacquered nail pointed across the room like an accusation looking for somewhere to land. It landed on Lily. That child. "I saw her wandering near the upstairs dressing room not 20 minutes ago. I thought it was strange at the time." A security guard in a black suit crossed the room in 4 strides and crouched beside Lily's chair. He was a large man, careful in his movements. "Open your bag, little girl." Lily's small patent leather purse sat on her lap. She unclipped it with shaking hands. Inside, wrapped in a tissue, was a small silver brooch shaped like a sparrow. The guard lifted it into the candlelight. 40 guests inhaled as one. "That is not the emerald." Celeste's voice was level and immediate. She rose to her feet. "That is not even Margaret's jewelry. Look at it carefully." Eleanor did not look at it. Her face had gone the color of bone china. "A thief in my own home. Blood always shows. I did not steal it." Lily's voice cracked on the second word. The tears came without warning, falling straight down her face. "I found it on the hallway carpet. I was going to give it back to whoever dropped it. I promise. I promise." Prescott stepped forward, his face the color of authority. He pointed at the floor in front of Eleanor's chair. Get on your knees, now. Apologize to your grandmother in front of every person in this room. Celeste moved without thinking, stepping between Prescott and her daughter, putting her body between the word and the child. She was not shaking. She was very clear. Do not speak to my daughter that way. She is 7 years old. Prescott did not raise his voice. He did not need to. Gerald's voice came from the head of the table, low and final. The voice of a man who knows exactly how much power he holds and prefers that others feel it rather than hear it. Celeste, if you want Lily to remain enrolled at St. Andrews, you will have her apologize. Tonight, here, in front of these guests. The silence that followed was the particular silence of a room waiting to see which way a person breaks. Celeste felt the weight of it on her chest. St. Andrews was Thomas's last gift to his daughter, set in the trust documents, protected the one piece of armor she had left. And Gerald knew it. Before she could speak, Lily moved. She slid down from her chair on her own without being asked and without being told, her small pink dress pooling on the polished floor. She pressed her palms flat against the wood. She spoke in a clear, quiet voice. I am sorry, Grandma. I am sorry, even though I did not take it. I am sorry. The room did not move. Celeste dropped to her knees beside her daughter and lifted her up by the shoulders. Her jaw set, her eyes burning. The kitchen door swung open behind them. A young housekeeper in a black apron came in, breathless, the emerald necklace swinging from her fingertips. Ma'am, I found it behind the vanity on the second floor. The clasp was broken. It must have fallen when you changed your earrings. Eleanor took the necklace with steady hands. She refastened it around her neck without looking at Lily, without speaking, without a single word directed at the child still standing in the center of the room, with her mother's hands on her shoulders and the tear tracks still wet on her face. Eleanor raised one hand to the room, the small dismissive wave of a woman returning the world to its proper order. A simple misunderstanding. Shall we continue? The sorbet is melting. In the taxi home, Lily curled into her mother's side and pressed her face into the black wool of Celeste's coat. Her voice, when it came, was muffled and very small. Mama, please, I do not ever want to go back there again. Celeste held her daughter against her chest and looked out the window at the city moving past in the dark. She said nothing. She rested her cheek on top of Lily's head and thought about the tin with $43 in it and the blue scarf on the marble table that Eleanor had not opened, and the 40 guests who had watched a 7-year-old girl kneel on the floor and had turned back to their sorbet. She thought about the lawyer whose voice had gone tight on the phone. She thought about the trust fund and the CFO and the legal mechanisms being quietly explored. She thought about the word mandatory on the cream envelope. She thought about her father. James Elliott Ward had been a quiet man. Not the quiet of emptiness, but the quiet of someone who had decided early that words should cost something, and so he spent them carefully. He had worked long hours, come home late, and always been there in the morning to make breakfast before school. He had died when Celeste was 14 in a warehouse fire in Gary, Indiana, according to the police officer who came to the door with his hat in his hands. A job-related accident, they had said, a hazard of his line of work. She had been 14. She had not known then what he actually did for a living. She knew now. The phone rang at 7 the next morning. Eleanor's voice clipped and certain, as though the evening before had simply not happened. Be here by 10. We are hosting a skating party for the grandchildren. The caterers need hands in the kitchen. You will wear something plain and bring the child. Appearances. Celeste held the phone to her ear and looked out the frosted window at the street below. Margaret, Lily is tired. She cried herself to sleep. The pause on the line lasted exactly 2 seconds. Celeste, dear, if you are not standing in my kitchen at 10 o'clock, my lawyers will file for custody of Lily before noon. Unfit housing, undernourishment. You know how these things are decided. A judge will look at your pay stubs and your leaking ceiling. Don't make me prove my point. The line went dead. Celeste sat on the edge of the bed with the phone still against her ear for a full minute. She looked at the crack in the plaster above the window, at the stack of medical bills in the basket by the door, at the ceiling where the water stain from the upstairs neighbor's bathroom had spread 2 inches over the winter. Then she got up. She laid out Lily's blue coat. She put on water for oatmeal. She thought, as she had thought many times in the past 3 years, about how power works, about how it presses and squeezes and finds every small opening in a person's life. She also thought, as she did every morning, about how to make the opening smaller. The pond behind the Voss estate in Winnetka had frozen clean and thick. A red and white tent had been erected along the bank strung with gold lights. A photographer in a wax jacket moved around the ice's edge, directing children and grandparents into holiday compositions. Eleanor, in white cashmere and a fur hat, stood at the center of the frame with Fletcher against her hip. Celeste was led through the back entrance into the service kitchen. She was handed an apron and a tray of canapes to arrange. Through the small window above the sink, she could see Lily on the ice, in borrowed skates, 2 sizes too large, wobbling, trying, smiling in the way she smiled when she did not know anyone was watching. Fletcher glided up behind her on the ice, smooth and practiced. His balance was the balance of a boy who had taken lessons since he was 4. He came up beside Lily with a smile that Celeste had seen on Prescott's face 100 times. "Race me," he said, "out to that red flag and back." Lily looked toward the flag, planted past the wooden sign at the edge of the cleared ice. The sign read, "Thin ice," in red letters. "No skating beyond this point. I do not think we are supposed to go that far." Fletcher's smile widened, the smile of a child who has been told his whole life that rules exist for other people. "Chicken," he darted behind her. "Or is it because you are poor, poor kids can't skate?" He planted both hands against the small of Lily's back and shoved. The ice had been waiting. It gave way the way thin ice always does, with a single high singing crack, like something delicate being snapped across a knee. And then Lily was gone. Through the kitchen window, Celeste saw it. She did not think. The part of her that thinks was not involved. Something older and faster took over the part that had been formed in the years before thought, when love is not a feeling but a physics, and a mother's body simply moves toward her child. She was through the kitchen door before the sound reached her. She was across the snow and past the tent and onto the ice, ignoring the warning sign, ignoring the crack spreading beneath her, ignoring the cold that hit her legs and then her waist and then her chest as she went through the weakened edge. The water was a shock so complete it erased everything else. She found Lily by touch more than sight, her daughter's arm, her coat, her hair. She pulled upward. Her feet found something solid below. She pushed. They broke the surface together. Lily in her arms, the cold air like a wall of glass. Lily's left leg was bent at an angle that a leg is not meant to bend. The bone had caught the submerged edge of the ice shelf. Blood was already darkening the white around them, spreading in a slow widening circle. On the bank, Celeste heard the photographer's shutter clicking. She heard Eleanor's voice crisp and carrying. "Take the Christmas photo first. She will be fine." Celeste did not look at them. She gathered her daughter against her chest, stood in the shallow water at the pond's edge, and began to walk. Away from the tent, away from the gold lights and the cameras and the cashmere coat. Across the snow, down the long gravel drive toward the road. Her dress was freezing to her body as she walked. She could feel the wet turning solid against her skin. Behind her she heard nothing. No one calling after her. No footsteps in the snow. Lily had stopped crying. Her lips had gone pale. She pressed her face into her mother's neck and held on. By the time Celeste reached the road, she was running. By the time she flagged down a cab on Green Bay Road, Lily's lips were the color of a bruise. The driver took one look at the blood in the ice and the woman holding a child who was no longer moving much, and he did not ask for directions. He drove. The emergency entrance of Northwestern Memorial Hospital appeared ahead, red lettering against the white sky. Celeste ran through the sliding doors with Lily in her arms and said as clearly and calmly as she could manage, "My daughter went through ice. Her leg is broken. She needs surgery." What followed moved fast and slow, at the same time the way emergencies do. Lily was lifted from her arms. A gurney appeared. A resident in green scrubs called out numbers and abbreviations as they moved through swinging doors. Core temperature. Open fracture. Get imaging. And then the doors closed and Celeste was alone in the hallway. She stood in a puddle of her own melt for a moment. Then her legs stopped cooperating and she found the wall and stayed there. A woman behind the billing window slid a clipboard toward her. "Ma'am, we need a deposit before we can authorize the MRI and the surgical pin. $2,400. Card or check?" Celeste opened her wallet. She looked at what was in it. $180. 3 weeks of double shifts at the hotel. "I do not have it tonight." She kept her voice even. "I will pay it. I will sign anything. Garnish my wages. I will sign right now, please. My daughter is bleeding on the other side of that door." The woman's face held a practiced, tired sympathy. I am sorry, ma'am. It is policy. Celeste took out her phone. The screen had cracked somewhere between the ice and here, but it still lit up. She dialed Eleanor. 2 rings. The call dropped. She dialed Gerald. Straight to voicemail. Again, voicemail. Again. She lowered the phone and let herself slide down the wall until she was sitting on the linoleum, with her back against the billing desk, her soaked coat spreading cold in a ring around her. She had stopped feeling her legs. She was not certain if that was the cold or something else. Her hand found the small tin locket she wore under her sweater, always every day, the only thing the foster system had not taken from her when she was 14 and the state had become her guardian. Inside it was her father's FBI service medal. She pressed it to her lips. Daddy, I am so sorry. Forgive me. She unclasped the chain with trembling fingers. There was an all-night pawn shop on North Clark. She had passed it 100 times and never thought she would need it. She would be back before they brought Lily out of surgery. She could do this. She was rising to her feet when she heard them, the sound of expensive leather soles on institutional floor. Unhurried, even. The sound of a person who does not rush because the room adjusts to them, not the other way around. 4 men in black suits moved down the corridor first, spreading to either side with the quiet efficiency of people who do this without thinking. Behind them came a 5th man. He was tall and broad, his dark overcoat hanging almost to the tops of his shoes. His hair was dark with threads of silver at the temples. He was, she would learn, in his late 30s, though he carried himself with a stillness that made the question of age irrelevant. There was a pale scar along the left side of his jaw, old and faded, the kind left by something that had meant to be permanent. His eyes were the color of slate after rain. They moved over the hallway with a professional calm, noting everything, dismissing nothing. He stopped in front of Celeste. He looked down at the open locket in her palm, at the metal inside it, at the small engraved initials on its face. His expression did not change, but something happened behind his eyes in the space between 1 second and the next. Something that had no name. He turned to the man at his right shoulder without looking away from the locket. Clear this floor. Get Dr. Holt on the first plane available. He operates tonight. Every charge on this admission goes to the Ashford account. No ceiling. Yes, sir. Celeste looked up from the floor. She had not moved. She was not certain she could. Who are you? It was not quite a question. Her voice did not have enough left in it for the full shape of a question. The man crouched down slowly until his face was level with hers. When he spoke, his voice was quiet enough that only she could hear it. I owe your father a life. Celeste Ward, I have been looking for you for 15 years. Somewhere behind the swinging doors at the end of the hall, a resident called for orthopedics. Lily was being taken up to surgery. Celeste tried to stand and her knees buckled. She sat back down on the linoleum floor. The man took off his black overcoat without a word and laid it across her shoulders. Then he sat down beside her on the floor of Northwestern Memorial Hospital in a suit that cost more than 3 months of her wages, and he waited. The surgical suite was 3 floors above the waiting area, and the red bulb above the operating theater doors burned without mercy through the hours that followed. Celeste sat on the padded bench in the private waiting area, with Roman Ashford's overcoat still across her shoulders. A nurse had brought coffee she did not drink and a blanket she let slide to the floor. The coat smelled of cedar and something colder. The particular cold of outdoor air carried on expensive fabric, the cold of a man who had been moving through the night before he arrived here. Roman sat beside her, forearms on his knees, the scar along his jaw catching the low corridor light. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The silence between them was not uncomfortable. It was the silence of 2 people in the presence of something larger than conversation. She finally asked the only question that mattered. Your name, please. Roman Ashford. She had heard the name before, not spoken aloud, not directly to her. She had seen it on the periphery of things in a Globe headline glimpsed on a stranger's phone 2 years ago. Something about federal investigations. Something about a South Boston family and indictments that had quietly dissolved. She had not paid attention at the time. It had not seemed relevant to her life. She looked at the man sitting beside her on the hospital bench. He was not what the word suggested when people said it, that word, the word that attached to names like his. He was not loud or demonstrative. He was still in the way that very focused things are still the stillness of something that does not need to announce itself. How do you know my father's name? He reached into the inner pocket of his jacket and produced a small leather fold worn at the corners from years of handling. He opened it slowly. Inside a photograph. Square format, the colors softened to pale yellow by time. A tall man in a dark suit standing on a wooden porch holding a small girl on his hip. The girl had one arm thrown around his neck. She was laughing so hard her eyes were shut. Celeste made a sound she had not made since she was 14 years old. That is my father. That is us. I was 5. That summer we went to a cabin in Wisconsin. Roman did not look at the photograph. He had memorized it long ago. He gave it to me the last night I ever saw him. She covered her mouth with one hand. Roman looked at the red bulb above the theater doors and began to speak in a voice that did not rise or fall. The voice of a man who has rehearsed this accounting in his own mind so many times that the emotion has worn smooth, has become something more like stone than feeling. Your father was FBI. Deep cover. In 2010 and 2011, he was running an operation inside a trafficking corridor that moved people from Chicago through Detroit and up into Toronto. It was one of the most dangerous assignments in the Bureau's Midwest Division, the kind of assignment they do not advertise, the kind where the agent's real name is kept out of every file that might be seen by the wrong eyes. He paused. She was looking at him now. I was 21. My father had just been killed by a rival family. I had no protection. I had nothing except a target on my back and enough stubbornness to keep breathing. I was in the back of a stolen car outside a warehouse on the south side with 2 broken ribs and a bullet lodged in my left thigh. I was not your father's target. I was not anyone's problem he needed to solve. He pulled me out anyway. He drove me to a safe house he maintained outside his official operations, a place no other agent knew about. He kept me there for 3 months. He changed the dressings on my leg himself twice a day because he would not let another agent see my face. He fed me. He talked to me. He argued with me about things that had nothing to do with either of our lives. And he told me the same thing over and over in different words until I finally understood that he meant it. Roman's voice shifted then. Only a fraction. Only enough. He said, you are young. You still get to choose what kind of man you become. The corridor outside the surgical floor was completely quiet. Somewhere far below them, an elevator chimed once and went silent. Celeste was crying without sound, one hand still pressed over her mouth. 3 months to the day after I walked out of that safe house, your father was killed. A warehouse in Gary, Indiana. He was protecting a witness during an extraction that went wrong. The building caught fire. They never recovered a complete body. The Bureau listed his cause of death as a workplace accident and sealed the file to protect the operation he had been running. I was 14, she said. They told me it was a car accident. They told a lot of families things that were easier than the truth. Roman turned toward her then for the first time fully. I made a promise the night of your father's funeral. I stood at the back of the church in South Shore because I could not go in because my face would have caused problems for people who did not deserve them. I stood outside and I promised that I would find his daughter and pay the debt. But by the time I looked, you had already been placed in the foster system. They had changed your last name in the records. They had sealed your case file. I have had people looking for you for 15 years. How did you find me tonight? Your father kept an emergency contact file with the Bureau when he was deep cover, sealed after his death but never deleted from the system. It listed a daughter, Celeste Ward dependent, last known address, Chicago. When your admission form came through tonight and the name matched against that old Federal Cross reference, my system flagged it. I was on a plane within the hour. Celeste looked down at the locket in her lap, the chain still unclasped, the metal still warm from her hands. She thought about 14 years old in a foster placement in Evanston and a caseworker who had told her to look forward, not back. She thought about every year since then, the years she had spent building something small and careful in hers, and how none of it had felt safe. And she had never been able to explain why, had never had a name for the particular unease that lived under her ribs, like a stone she had swallowed young and learned to breathe around. She understood now that the stone had a shape. It was the shape of a story she had never been allowed to finish. Did my father, she started, and then stopped. Roman waited. Did he ever mention us? My mother. Me. He showed me this photograph on the 3rd night I was in the safe house. He did not say much about it. He set it on the table between us and looked at it for a long time. Then he put it face down, and we did not speak about it again. But before I left on the last morning, he pressed it into my hand and told me to keep it until I could give it back to his daughter. She pressed the locket against her sternum with both hands. She was quiet for a long time, long enough for the corridor to shift from deep night toward the first pale intimation of morning. Then she said, "This changes nothing about who you are. I want you to understand that I know that. But it tells me who my father was, and I am grateful that I know it." Roman nodded once. It was the nod of a man who has been carrying something heavy and has set it down in the right place. The red bulb above the theater doors went dark at 6:40 in the morning. The surgeon who emerged was silver-haired and precise, still peeling off a second pair of gloves. His accent was Swiss, and his bearing was the bearing of a man who has never once doubted his own hands. "Mrs. Ward, your daughter is in recovery. The tibia was a clean fracture. We reduced it, placed a titanium pin, and closed the wound. With physical therapy beginning in 6 weeks, she will run again by spring. She will have no lasting limitation." Celeste did not remember standing up. She only knew that she had her arms around a man in a surgical mask and that he had allowed it, and that somewhere behind her, Roman was saying thank you in a language she did not recognize. They moved Lily to a private suite on the 11th floor as the sun came up over Lake Michigan, turning the water from black to silver to pale gold. The suite had floor-to-ceiling windows and a small potted tree on the side table with white lights. A private nurse sat in the armchair already briefed. Someone had placed a stuffed rabbit with a red ribbon on the pillow beside Lily's head. Lily woke slowly, blinking at the light on the ceiling. Her left leg was encased in a composite cast fitted with pressure sensors. Her mother was in the chair beside the bed, one hand still holding hers. "Mama." Celeste's eyes opened. Before either of them could find the next word, there was a soft knock at the door. 3 men entered and arranged themselves with a quietness that suggested long practice. The first was lean and precise in a charcoal suit and a silk tie, carrying a leather folio under one arm, a man who looked as though he had walked out of a courtroom and never entirely left it. The second wore dark-rimmed glasses and a navy sweater over an open collar, a tablet angled against his hip, the kind of person whose intelligence is visible in the economy of his movements. The third was the largest of the 3, broad, across the shoulders, in a way that suggested something structural, forearms carrying the edges of tattoos beneath his rolled cuffs. He was carrying an enormous stuffed rabbit with a red bow around its neck, which he set carefully on the foot of the bed as though it were evidence. Roman stepped in behind them and closed the door. His voice was formal in the way of a man making something official, giving it weight. "Stellan, Rafferty, Bowen." He looked at Celeste, then at Lily. "This is Celeste, my younger sister, and this is Lily, our niece." The 3 men bowed their heads in the same moment, a small, synchronized inclination that spoke of something older than manners. Lily stared at them with enormous eyes. "Do I have 3 uncles now?" Bowen crossed the room and crouched beside the bed so his face was level with hers. Up close, he was not frightening at all. He had the face of a man who has seen enough to know that children are the only honest people in a room. "3 uncles, princess. I am Uncle Bowen. Anybody bothers you, says one bad word to you, you call Uncle Bowen. I handle it personally." Rafferty raised one finger from his position by the window. "Allowance birthday surprises anything with sugar. That is my department. You call Uncle Rafferty." Stellan inclined his head with a precise courtroom smile. "Legal matters contracts anyone who gives your mother difficulty. You call Uncle Stellan." Lily laughed. A real laugh, the kind that comes from somewhere below the lungs, from the place in a child's body where genuine delight lives. It was the first laugh Celeste had heard from her daughter in months, and the sound of it undid something in her chest that had been sealed shut since the morning of the phone call about Thomas. She turned to Roman. She shook her head. She could not accept this. The words formed and would not come. Roman looked at her directly. His voice was quiet and final. "This is not charity, Celeste. This is a debt I owe your father. Do not insult his memory by refusing to let me pay it." She had no answer for that. She understood, in the way one understands things that arrive after long absence, that she had been looking for a reason to trust something, and that this man was offering her one, and that the offering was real. Celeste had conditions. She stated them 2 days later in the study of the Ashford estate in Evanston, a room that smelled of old books and cedar smoke, with the lake visible through the windows as a pale gray line between the trees and the ski. She did not wait to be offered a seat. She sat down and she said what she needed to say. I will accept your help for Lily's medical costs and her schooling. I will stay here while the situation with the Voss family is unresolved, but I will not live as a dependent. I have a degree in nonprofit management interrupted, but most of the way complete. You have spoken about wanting to establish a foundation. I will run it. That is the arrangement, or there is no arrangement. Roman looked at her for a moment with an expression she could not entirely read. Then he said agreed. It was the first time in 3 years that Celeste had negotiated a condition and had it met without argument. The feeling was so unfamiliar she almost did not recognize it. It took her a moment to understand that what she felt was not relief. It was dignity. It had been so long that she had forgotten the difference. The Ashford estate sat 40 minutes north of Chicago in a pocket of old-growth trees that pressed close to the lake. The house was 4 stories of gray stone and leaded glass with a walled garden and a stable block that no longer held horses. Lily's room was on the second floor, a 4-poster bed with a cream canopy, a window seat piled with cushions, a closet already stocked with dresses in her size. Beyond the frosted glass, deer moved between the pines at dusk. Lily woke on the first morning, blinked at the canopy and said, "Mama, is this heaven?" Celeste kissed the top of her head and did not answer because for a moment she genuinely did not know. The first week, Lily moved carefully through the house on her thin carbon cane, exploring with the systematic attention of a child conducting a private survey. She found the library in the kitchen and the greenhouse off the south wing. She found Roman in the kitchen at 5 in the morning making coffee, and she sat down across from him at the long oak table without being invited and said, "Are you the man who paid for my leg?" He set down his cup. "Yes, then you can stay." She slid off the chair and went to find breakfast. Roman sat for a moment looking at the place she had vacated, and then he refilled his coffee. The evenings became gradually a different texture. It began with the books. Lily had brought 3 from the apartment on West Wrightwood, carried in her school bag, their spines worn from repeated reading. She did not ask anyone to read to her. She was 7, and she read well. But she had a habit inherited from years of quiet nights in the apartment of wanting a voice in the room while she read a human presence at the end of the day. She had always had Celeste. One evening, the 9th night at the estate, she appeared in the doorway of the study where Roman was working and stood there until he looked up. "I am not going to sleep yet," she said. He looked at her for a moment. Then he closed the folder in front of him and said, "Sit down then." Stellan, passing in the corridor outside, slowed his pace, looked through the half-open door and kept walking. He found Rafferty in the kitchen. "You need to come see this," he said. Rafferty followed him back down the corridor. They stood at the edge of the doorway and looked in at the man who ran the most significant private organization in the Midwest, sitting on the floor of his own study, with his back against the leather sofa, and a 7-year-old child asleep against his arm, a picture book open across her knees. Neither of them said anything. They went back to the kitchen and did not mention it again that night. The question of school could not wait. Celeste had done the research herself over 3 evenings at the desk in her room with a legal pad reviewing options within a 40-minute radius. She identified 3 schools. She chose Northgate Academy in Winnetka, not because it was the most prestigious and not because it was the one Roman's name carried the most weight at. She chose it because it had the strongest visual arts program in the district, and Lily drew constantly, filling the backs of papers and the margins of books with small, careful figures and scenes the way some children whistle without knowing they are doing it. She told Roman her choice the following morning. He said, "I will have Stellan call the headmaster." She said, "I will tell you what Stellan should say." He looked at her. A small concession moved across his face that was not quite a smile. Stellan made the call on a Thursday. The conversation lasted 90 seconds. He relayed one addition to the standard language that Celeste had requested. "My niece is not a liability to be managed. She is a child who needs to be seen." Lily's name was on a classroom door at Northgate by Friday morning. On Monday, 3 matte black Mercedes sedans turned onto the circular drive. The yard, which had been noise and movement, went quiet. Bowen stepped out of the lead car first in his charcoal overcoat, scanned the perimeter with the trained patience of a man who has done that same scan on 3 continents, and then offered his arm. Lily climbed out carefully, her thin cane tapping the granite. She wore a navy blazer with the Northgate crest, a white blouse, a red scarf that Celeste had tied at her throat that morning. Her cast had come off 4 days ago. She walked with a small limp that the Swiss surgeon had promised would be gone by Easter. Bowen bent to her ear. "I will be right here when the bell rings. You remember the word," she whispered back, solemn as a small judge pine cone. "One word, and I am through that door in 6 seconds." Lily straightened her shoulders and walked toward the main entrance. Her new classroom had 12 children in it and a teacher named Miss Alderton, who greeted her at the door with the warmth of a woman who had received very clear information about the consequences of not being warm. Lily's seat was by the window. Her deskmate was a girl named Wren, small for 7, with red-brown hair in 2 braids, in a hand-knit sweater that had seen better winters, and a gap between her front teeth that appeared when she smiled, which was immediately. "Hi, I am Wren. Do you want to be friends?" Lily set down her bag. She nodded once hard, and then she hugged Wren across the desk without warning. Wren laughed into Lily's shoulder. It was the laugh of a child who did not know yet what it meant that Lily had not had a friend like this before, which was exactly the right kind of laugh. At recess, they walked at the edge of the snow-dusted basketball court, arm in arm, sharing a clementine. Then a group of older children came through the visitor's gate with an adult, and among them were 2 faces from St. Andrew's children from Fletcher's grade, who recognized Lily with the particular alertness of kids who have been given permission to be cruel. "Oh my God, is that the trash picker? How did you even get in here?" Bowen had been standing at the corner of the building. Celeste had not asked him to stay past drop-off. He had stayed anyway in the way of a man who operates on instinct rather than instruction. He stepped out from around the brick pillar. He said nothing for a moment. He simply stood there, 6'4" charcoal overcoat eyes carrying the temperature of a deep freeze in January. "I am sorry, what did you just say to my niece?" The color drained from 4 small faces in near perfect unison. One of them dropped his juice box. They turned and ran back through the gate. Lily pressed her face into Wren's shoulder, shaking with silent laughter. Wren, bewildered and delighted, laughed too, because Lily was, and because that was enough. That evening at the long dining table before the soup course had been cleared, Lily slid off her chair and ran the length of the room in her socks and threw her arms around Roman's neck from behind his chair. "Uncle Roman, I have a friend. Her name is Wren. She likes me because I am me, not because of any of the other stuff." Roman set his spoon down. He lifted one hand and rested it on top of Lily's head. It was a gesture so simple and so entirely unlike him that Rafferty, halfway through a sentence about a real estate transaction in Oak Park, stopped speaking and looked at his coffee. Stellan looked at his plate. Neither of them finished what they had been saying. In the doorway of the dining room, Celeste stood with a glass of water she had come to refill and had forgotten she was holding. She watched the man who controlled more of Chicago's organized world than most people would believe carefully smooth a 7-year-old's flyaway hair back from her forehead. And the stone she had been breathing around since she was 14 years old shifted just slightly in the direction of smaller. 3 weeks after arriving at the estate, Celeste drove herself south on Sheridan Road in one of the estate's cars without telling anyone where she was going. She had been thinking about the footage question since the night in the hospital. Stellan had already begun pulling what he could through legal channels, financial records, email threads recovered from cloud backups. He had found things that would be useful. But the core of the evidence, the thing that would make every other document matter, the thing that would show not just what the Voss family had done, but what they had chosen while doing it, that required a camera. And there was only one camera she knew of. The Voss estate in Winnetka had a groundskeeper named Harold, a man in his late 60s who had worked the property for 22 years and who had 3 years running not received a Christmas bonus. Celeste had met him twice during her marriage to Thomas. He had shown Lily a robin's nest in the hedgerow the summer she was 4. He had helped Celeste carry groceries from the car the Christmas she was 7 months pregnant, and no one else had thought to offer. She remembered his face. She had always remembered faces. She found him at his house in a neighborhood just off Green Bay Road, and she sat across from him at his kitchen table, and she told him what she needed and why, without embellishment or appeal to emotion, because he was the kind of man who responds to honesty the way a compass responds to north. He was quiet for a long time. Then he went to the cabinet above the refrigerator and took down a USB drive. He set it on the table between them and put his finger on top of it. "I have been waiting," he said, "for someone to ask." The footage was 38 seconds long. The camera had been mounted on the rear terrace of the estate, pointing toward the pandan and the tent and the bank. The angle was oblique but clear. The audio had been captured by the camera's built-in microphone. In the footage, Eleanor stood with Fletcher pressed against her hip. Gerald held his mulled wine in one hand. Prescott was laughing at something his wife had said. The photographer crouched at the pond's edge, adjusting his lens. Then the ice cracked. The sound was audible on the recording, that high singing fracture. And then a child's voice, thin with cold and terror, calling for help. On the footage, Eleanor turned toward the sound. Gerald turned toward the sound. Prescott turned toward the sound. Every adult present on that bank turned toward the sound, and then every one of them turned back. Fletcher smiled for the camera. The photographer said, "Beautiful. Hold it just a moment more." Celeste drove back to the estate in complete silence. She sat in the parked car in the estate's driveway for 5 minutes with the USB drive in her hand and the heater running, looking at nothing in particular. Then she went inside and gave the drive to Stellan. What he built from that foundation in the following 48 hours was the kind of legal structure that takes most firms months to assemble. The USB footage. 22 emails recovered between Prescott and Bellamy's shared cloud backup discussing their plan to remove Lily from Celeste's custody through any available means, including one exchange in which Bellamy had written, "The child is the problem. Remove the child and the problem removes itself." And an audit of Voss Group's treasury movements, confirmed by a former CFO who had nothing left to protect, showing that Gerald Voss had 6 weeks ago instructed his financial team to begin drafting the legal mechanism to reclassify Lily's trust fund, the trust Thomas had made irrevocable, as a recoverable asset under the family's restructuring plan. It was, Stellan said, placing the completed file on Roman's desk with the care of a man handling something that might explode, the cleanest case I have assembled in 20 years. Roman looked at it for 4 minutes without speaking. Then he looked up. "The Ironwood meeting. When Thursday?" He nodded. Then he looked at Celeste, who was standing at the window with her arms crossed, looking at the lake. "There is something you need to know," he said. She turned. "Ironwood Capital is mine. I registered it through a Delaware holding structure 3 weeks before I found you. Voss Group is overextended by $400 million. There is precisely one buyer capable of injecting the capital they need before their debt covenants collapse. They came to us. They have been negotiating in good faith with a principal they have never met and cannot verify." He paused. "I built the cage before I knew you existed. I only needed a reason to close it." Celeste was quiet for a long moment. The lake outside the window was pale silver under the afternoon clouds. When she spoke, her voice was steady. "Don't close it for me. Close it because it is right. Because what they did to Lily is right to answer for. If you do it for me alone, it becomes personal, and personal things become complicated." Roman looked at her for 3 full seconds. Then he said, "Understood." The Ironwood meeting was held on a Thursday afternoon on the 38th floor of the Four Seasons on East Delaware. Gerald arrived in a fresh suit and a barber's close shave, carrying 3 prepared answers to 3 projected questions about quarterly projections. He had been told he would be meeting a principal named Ernst Holloway, a Geneva-based investor with a reputation for brevity and privacy. The elevator opened onto a hallway of cream marble. 2 men in black suits stood at the conference room entrance and opened the door without asking his name. Inside, at the head of a long walnut table, sat Rafferty. Dark-rimmed glasses, navy sweater, a steaming espresso, a closed black folder. He was perhaps 20 years too young to be Ernst Holloway. "Mr. Voss, please sit." Gerald sat. He looked for another face and did not find one. "Where is Mr. Holloway?" Rafferty did not open the folder. He folded his hands on top of it. His smile was perfectly polite and entirely without warmth. "Mr. Holloway is an advisory designation on our registry. He does not attend closings. My name is Rafferty. I will be handling the final stage of review on behalf of Ironwood. Before we proceed, there is a small matter I need to address. A family matter." Gerald's hand found the arm of his chair. Rafferty reached into the folder and placed a single photograph on the table between them. It was a medical photograph taken in the emergency department of Northwestern Memorial. It showed a 7-year-old child on a gurney, her left leg at an angle. A leg is not meant to hold blood, visible on the white sheet beneath her. Gerald's face lost its color in 3 distinct stages. "Is any part of what I am about to describe inaccurate?" Rafferty said. "Approximately 3 weeks ago, your 7-year-old granddaughter fell through the ice during a family gathering on your property. She sustained an open fracture of the tibia. She was transported to a public emergency room alone by her mother in below freezing temperatures. The hospital required a deposit of $2,400 to authorize surgical intervention. No member of the Voss family answered their phone. A third party was required to step in, or the child would have waited without surgery. Is any part of that inaccurate? Gerald's mouth opened. It was a misunderstanding. Celeste took the girl without telling us. She is an unstable woman. She uses the child to Rafferty picked up his espresso and took a single unhurried sip. He set it down. Then bring them home, Mr. Voss. You have 3 days. Produce them at a public event of our choosing, demonstrate a unified family and ironwood countersigns on the 4th day. If we do not observe a loving and functional household, we terminate the engagement and issue a public statement explaining our reasoning. That statement will run in the Financial Times by the end of the week. Gerald rode the elevator down with one hand flat against the paneling to keep his legs from deciding the floor was not where they remembered it. He called Eleanor before he reached the lobby. Whatever it costs, he said, bring them back tonight. I do not care what you have to say to her. The company is finished if that child is not under our roof by Sunday. That evening in the estate's unlit study, Roman read a text message from Rafferty. He set the phone down and looked out at the pines going dark in the last of the light. A small sound moved across his face that was not quite a smile. Good, he said to the empty room. Let them run to us. The custody petition arrived 3 days later, served by a sheriff's courier at the estate's front gate. Celeste read it on the stone steps with Bowen beside her. Her hand began to shake at the 3rd page, which was the page that described Roman Ashford as a dangerous and unsuitable cohabitant and characterized Celeste as a neglectful and unstable parent whose minor child had suffered serious physical injury under her supervision. Stellan was on the phone within the hour. His voice was even and precise in the way of a man who treats panic as a professional failing. Celeste, look at me. Breathe. This is a photograph taken with a broken camera. By the time I finish, the picture will look very different. Do you trust me? She did. Monday morning, courtroom 4B, Cook County Family Court. Prescott arrived in a midnight blue suit. Bellamy wore pearls and a carefully constructed expression of concerned maternal feeling. Their attorney, a man named Silas Ward, who operated out of an office above a nail salon in Cicero, arranged his exhibits with the concentration of someone who was being paid a great deal to seem competent. At 9:58, the courtroom's rear door opened and a man walked in who had not been listed on Celeste's filings. He was tall and wore a single-breasted black suit of a fabric that did not shine. He carried one leather binder. The bailiff, without deciding to, straightened his shoulders. The clerk read from the appearance sheet. Counsel for respondent. Stellan Marsh, Marsh and Ashford Associates. Silas Ward's head came up so fast his reading glasses slid down his nose. Prescott's mouth opened. The name moved through the room in the way that certain names do in certain rooms. Marsh and Ashford. Name partners both. Stellan Marsh had argued 3 cases before the Supreme Court in the current term alone. Bellamy found Prescott's sleeve under the table and could not hold it. Stellan did not offer an opening statement. He walked forward and placed the black binder on the judge's bench. Your Honor, I am going to save the court and the petitioner's considerable time. Judge Carla Reeves read for 11 minutes. The courtroom was completely silent. Then she looked up and found Prescott Voss. Mr. Voss, the footage before me shows you, your wife, your parents, and other adults on the bank of a pond. It shows your son pushing a 7-year-old child through ice clearly marked as unsafe. It records the sound of that child screaming for help, and it documents the moment when every adult present turned back to a photographer. Do you have a response to that footage? Prescott's attorney stood. Your Honor, the circumstances were. Sit down, Mr. Ward. Mr. Voss, yes or no? Did you hear your niece screaming under the ice? It was a misunderstanding. There was a Judge Reeves closed the binder. Petition denied. This file is being forwarded to the Cook County District Attorney for review under the Child Endangerment Statute subsection 2 regarding adults present at the scene of injury to a minor. You will hear from that office within the week. Do not leave the state of Illinois. Court is adjourned. Bellamy's composure broke in the middle of the courtroom. She went down in her chair the way something structural does when the load above it is finally too much, and the crying that came out of her was not dignified and not quiet and not designed for any audience. Prescott, We are going to lose everything, Prescott. We are going to lose everything. Gerald signed the Ironwood acquisition agreement 2 days later. The company his grandfather had founded in 1931, valued the previous Friday at $940 million, changed hands for $282 million. He made it to the lobby of the Four Seasons before his left arm went numb. Eleanor caught his jacket as his knees folded. An ambulance reached the corner in 4 minutes. The night air over Evanston was absolute by 2 in the morning, the deep Midwestern winter silence that swallows sound completely. The pines around the estate stood without moving. The lake was a dark mass beyond the tree line. Even the wind had found somewhere else to be. The first sensor tripped at 3 minutes past 3. The second tripped at 3:11. In the basement monitoring room, two of Bowen's men had the footage up before the second alert finished processing. 3 figures moving through the tree line. 2 vehicles parked on the service road beyond the eastern fence. 1 figure carrying an implement consistent with bolt cutters. Bowen was awake at 3:14. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The exterior lighting grid went down in a carefully chosen pattern, leaving the intruders visible to the estate's thermal imaging and invisible to each other. Prescott Voss never reached the lawn. He was taken in the pines face down in 2 feet of snow, with a knee between his shoulder blades and a gloved hand across his mouth before he had identified his own location on a map. At 3:48 in the morning, Prescott Voss knelt in the gravel courtyard of the Ashford estate, in restraints, his shirt open at the collar. One eye swollen from the ground, the 2 men he had hired kneeling 8 feet to his left in the same posture. Roman came out of the house in a charcoal dressing gown over a black sweater, holding a low ball of whiskey. He stopped 10 feet from Prescott and looked at him for a long moment. His face was not angry. It was tired in a way that went deeper than the hour. "Do you understand what you just attempted?" Prescott's face had come apart. The suit and the composure and the practiced authority were all somewhere back in the pines. What remained was a middle-aged man who had run out of things to hide behind. "Please, I only wanted the money back. One night, I was not going to hurt her. I swear on my son's life I was not going to hurt her. You were going to use a 7-year-old child as collateral to recover money that you lost through your own actions. Tell me one reason why you should go on breathing." The front door opened behind Roman. Celeste came out barefoot on the cold stone steps. She wore a long ivory robe, her hair loose. She had not been able to sleep and had come downstairs for water and had seen the floodlights from the kitchen window and had understood in the way that she understood most things immediately and completely. She walked across the courtyard without hurry and stopped beside Roman. She did not look at Prescott. She looked at Roman. "Don't." Her voice was very quiet, not because she was uncertain, because she was completely certain, and certainty does not need volume. Not because he deserves mercy. He does not. But Lily is asleep in that house, and I will not have her grow up knowing there was blood in this snow because of her. That is not the story I am building for my daughter. That is not what my father would have done. Roman's jaw moved once. A muscle in the scar along his jaw pulled tight and then released. He turned to Bowen. "Call the Illinois State Police. Tell them we have an attempted home invasion. Subjects restrained in custody. Full cooperation." Prescott was loaded into the back of a state police cruiser at 4:29 in the morning. The lights moved away down the gravel drive and were absorbed by the pines. Celeste stood in the courtyard as the sound of the engine faded. The snow was blue in the darkness. The pines were still. Above the tree line, one star was visible through a break in the clouds, very bright and very cold. Roman stood beside her. He had not moved. She looked at the place where the police car had been. She thought about the man who had told her father's story, and the man her father had saved, and the man she had just stood beside in the dark and spoken to as though she had always known him, as though they had been standing together in courtyards like this for a long time, making difficult decisions in the early hours. She thought about Lily asleep on the second floor. She thought about what she had said and why. Then she turned and went back inside to make coffee because the night was not finished yet, and the morning was still an hour away, and Celeste Ward had a long habit of meeting both on her own terms. The Chicago Tribune ran the headline at the top of the regional digital edition at 7 in the morning. Voss Dynasty in ruins. Younger son arrested in alleged kidnapping plot. Celeste read it on her phone at the kitchen table with both hands wrapped around a mug of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. She read it once. Then she set the phone face down on the oak table and looked out the window at the pines. The snow had stopped sometime before dawn. The grounds of the Ashford estate lay white and undisturbed in the early light, the deer trails from the night before already filling in at the edges. A single crow sat on the stone wall of the garden, very black against the white, and then it was gone. Celeste sat there for a long time. She was thinking about Thomas. Not the Thomas of the end, the phone call, and the wet October highway and the voicemail with 3 seconds of breath in it. She was thinking about the Thomas she had known before all of that, the one who had sat across from her in a coffee shop on North Michigan Avenue 10 years ago and told her with the earnest conviction of a young man who still believed his family was one thing and he was another, that he intended to be different from them. She had believed him. She had been right to believe him. He had been different as much as a person can be different from the water they grew up in. She thought about what Bellamy had said in the courtroom, the words that had fallen into the room like something dropped from a height. Your husband was calling you because Gerald had just cut him out of the trust. Thomas was going to take you and Lily and leave that night. Gerald knew he was going to walk. She had carried a stone under her ribs for 3 years that she had told herself was grief. She understood now that it was something more specific than grief. It was the weight of a story. She had never been allowed to finish a story whose ending had been decided by someone else before she could read it. She knew now. She picked up her phone. She opened a new document and began writing because Celeste Ward had always processed the things that mattered by putting them into lists, and what she was building now required precision. The Lily Ward Foundation, nonprofit status, state of Illinois. Mission educational, medical, and housing support for orphaned and under-resourced children of Greater Chicago. Board of Directors, initial funding, first cohort of recipients. She had been working on the framework for 3 weeks in the evenings after Lily was asleep, building it the way she had built everything in the last 3 years, quietly and carefully and without asking anyone's permission. Roman had offered her an office. She had chosen one herself. A corner room on the second floor of the estate with 2 windows and enough desk space to spread files without things falling on the floor. It smelled of old wood and the quiet that comes from high ceilings. She had started in a small way to feel that she was building something real. Christmas Eve arrived with the quality of light that only comes to the Great Lakes region in the deep of winter, a low gold that sits just above the tree line and makes the snow look lit from within. By 5 in the afternoon, every window of the Ashford estate was warm against the blue dusk. Strings of white lights traced the eaves. Candles glowed in the leaded panes. The house smelled of things Lily had never associated with a Christmas before: roasted bird and rosemary and orange peel simmering on the stove, and the cedar sweetness of fresh-cut wreaths on every door. From the kitchen came sounds that required explanation. Rafferty was constructing a mocktail at the island with the focused attention of a man who had decided this was his most important task of the year. Pomegranate seeds, ginger ale, fresh, mint, a sugared cranberry speared on a silver toothpick. He set the finished glass on the counter and turned to address the room. This is for Lily. No one touches it. Bowen was on the floor of the great hall in his shirt sleeves, surrounded by 37 feet of Lionel O-gauge track, 2 miniature pines a tunnel, and a locomotive whose instruction booklet he had arranged face down under the leg of the sofa where it could not influence his decisions. He had been assembling the track for 90 minutes, and it had yet to form a complete loop. He was not troubled by this. He was not a man who is troubled by things he has decided to solve. Stellan stood over an enormous roasting pan and a borrowed apron, basting a bronze turkey with a long-handled spoon at the intervals specified by a recipe he had printed and laminated. He had been basting since 3 o'clock. He regarded the task with the gravity he usually reserved for oral arguments before appellate courts. The great hall smelled of everything warm all at once, and Lily moved through it in her white velvet dress with the red sash, her hair in 2 braids with red ribbon, her pearl-tipped cane held more for the pleasure of it now than for the need, because her limp was fading and her leg was strong, and the surgeon's promise about spring was already proving accurate. She moved through the hall the way she had moved through every room in this house since the first week, with the systematic joy of a child who cannot quite believe the place is real and is therefore conducting an ongoing inventory to confirm it. She found Roman in the doorway between the hall and the study, standing with a glass of Lagavulin, looking at the tree. It was a Fraser fir 22 feet hauled in by Bowen and 3 of his men on the 21st, and decorated over 2 evenings by Lily and Rafferty, with white ribbon and crystal icicles, and the one box of heirloom ornaments that had come down from somewhere in Roman's family history and which he had not looked at in several years. Lily came up beside him and looked at the tree. "It is the best one I have ever seen," she said. "You said that about the one in the hospital room. That one had 5 ornaments and a cord that was too short. This one is different." He looked down at her. "This is true." She leaned against his arm, the small, easy lean of a child who has decided that a person is safe and has stopped thinking about the decision. "Merry Christmas, Uncle Roman." His throat did something that had no name. He set his glass down on the mantel and rested his hand on top of her head, and he could not say the words back immediately, not because he did not mean them, but because he could not find the passage from feeling to language quickly enough, and Lily did not seem to require it. She simply stood there against his arm with her small weight and her red ribbons and her absolute certainty that this was where she was supposed to be. Celeste came down the grand staircase at 6:20. The dress was deep cranberry velvet off the shoulder, the kind of dress that requires a person to have decided at some earlier moment that they are allowed to take up space in a room. Her hair was up pinned high. She wore her mother's thin gold chain and a pair of small ruby drops that had arrived in a box outside her bedroom door 3 days ago with no note, and which she had understood without asking. She came off the last stair and crossed the hall toward the fire. Roman turned. There was a moment of perhaps 3 seconds in which he did not say anything, in which the man who had run more of Chicago's organized world than most federal investigators had mapped simply stood beside his fireplace in his own home and looked at the woman walking toward him with the expression of a person who has prepared for many contingencies and has not prepared for this one. Rafferty at the kitchen island noticed. He looked at Stellan through the open doorway. Stellan looked back. Neither of them spoke. Before the moment could become anything more than a moment, the staircase produced a sound like small thunder, and Lily appeared at the top in her white velvet and her red ribbons sliding down the banister, with both hands landing at the bottom with a thud that made Bowen look up from the track layout. She ran the length of the hall and threw both arms around Roman's waist from the front. "Merry Christmas, Uncle Roman. I said it already, but I am saying it again because you did not say it back the first time." He placed both hands on her shoulders and held her there. "Merry Christmas, Lily." She beamed at him with all of her teeth and then spun away to find her mocktail. Dinner was laid in the long dining room under 3 candelabra. Bing Crosby played quietly from somewhere. The turkey arrived first, carried by Stellan with the solemnity of a man presenting evidence. The wine followed. Bowen arrived last with Lily riding on his shoulders because she had requested it, and because Bowen, it turned out, was constitutionally unable to refuse Lily anything she asked for with sufficient sincerity. Forks met china, glasses were raised. Lily, seated between Roman and her mother, laughed so hard at one of Bowen's stories that cranberry juice came out of her nose, and Rafferty laughed so hard at that he had to put his napkin over his entire face, and even Stellan, who had a reputation in 3 states for unshakable composure, made a sound into his wineglass that he immediately denied. Celeste sat in the candlelight and looked down the table at the 4 men who had appeared in a hospital corridor 6 weeks ago and had not left, and she thought about a word she had not used for a very long time, not since Thomas. Not since before, not in 3 years of early mornings and overdue bills in the tin with $43 in it. The word was home. She thought it quietly inside herself, without saying it the way you think a word when you are not yet ready to test whether it will hold. Roman was watching her when she looked up. He did not look away. She did not look away either. Later after dinner, after Lily had been carried upstairs by Bowen in a state of satisfied near sleep, and the dining room had gone quiet, Roman found Celeste in the study. She was sitting in the leather chair by the window with her shoes off and a glass of wine in her hand, looking at the snow on the garden wall. He sat across from her. He reached under the desk and brought out a flat leather portfolio and set it on the table between them. "This one first," he said. She set down her glass and pulled it toward her. The ribbon came away easily. Inside was a sheaf of documents bearing the seal of the Cook County Probate and Family Court. She read the heading twice. "Order restoring trust assets in the matter of the estate of Thomas Voss and the minor beneficiary Lily Ward. Full restoration of the original trust instrument. $7 million principal and accrued interest transferred to a protected account in Lily's name, effective the date of this order." She turned the page. Below the court order was a second document, clean serif type on heavy paper. Articles of Incorporation, State of Illinois. The Lily Ward Foundation, a non-profit corporation organized for the exclusive purpose of providing educational access, medical support, and stable housing assistance to orphaned and under-resourced children of the greater Chicago metropolitan area. The name stopped her. Her name. Her daughter's name. Not the Voss name. Not anyone else's name. Lily Ward. The name on the tin with $43 in it. The name on the blue scarf that had sat on a marble table unopened. The name that was going to be on a plaque on a door on Beacon Street when the office opened in February. She read the mission statement 3 times. When she looked up, her face was wet, and she had not noticed it happening. "Roman," she said, "why? You keep doing this, and I keep not having the words for it, and I need you to tell me why." He leaned forward in his chair and put his forearms on his knees and looked at her directly the way he looked at things he had decided to be honest about. "Your father did not only save my life," he said. "He gave me a reason to spend it in a particular direction. He sat across from me in a safe house on the South Side for 3 months, and he argued with me about what a person owes to the world they live in, and he never once told me what the answer was. He only kept asking the question until I understood that the asking was the point. That debt was never going to be settled with a check or a favor or a financial instrument. It could only be settled by a life that looked something like his." He paused. "I found his daughter sitting on a hospital floor trying to pawn his service medal to pay for his granddaughter's surgery. And I thought, this is what the answer looks like. This is where the life should go." Celeste pressed the back of her hand against her mouth. "This is for him," Roman said. "And for you. And for Lily. Do not insult his memory by refusing to let me pay it." She sat in the leather chair by the window with the documents in her lap, and the snow on the garden wall outside, and the fire burning down in the stone hearth, and she let herself feel the full weight of what had been restored to her. Not the money, not the legal documents, not the foundation. The story of her father. The story of who he had been and what he had chosen and why he had run toward a burning building instead of away from it. She had been carrying half a story for 15 years. Now she had the rest of it. She looked at Roman. "Thank you," she said. Those were not adequate words for what she meant, but they were the words she had, and she said them with everything she had. He nodded once, the nod of a man who has put something down in the right place. They sat by the fire until the candles burned low and they did not speak very much. And what they said when they did speak was not about any of the things that had happened, but about small things, the kind of things that people talk about when they are not performing and not afraid. At some point past midnight, she said, "I have not talked like this with anyone in 3 years." He said, "Neither have I." She looked at the fire. He looked at her, looking at the fire. Neither of them said anything else about it, and neither of them needed to. Some things do not require a declaration to become real. They simply arrive quietly and without ceremony and take up residence in the space between two people who have both been careful for a very long time. 2 weeks passed. The brownstone on Astor Street was auctioned in a closed process on the 12th of January to cover the second mortgage on the Voss estate in Winnetka. Gerald was discharged from Northwestern Memorial on a Tuesday with a walker and a prescription list and a body that had used up most of its reserves. Eleanor met him at the discharge bay in a taxi, not a town car, a taxi. Her hair had gone entirely white in 9 days. She had not attempted to color it. There was no one left to color it for. They took a furnished room in a residential hotel in Wicker Park, the kind of place with a single plug-in kettle on the dresser and a laminated card asking guests not to smoke near the drapes. The view from the window was a brick wall and a fire escape. On the second morning, they got into a taxi and gave the driver the address at the top of the Evanston Road. Bowen received them at the estate's gate and did not open it. "Mr. Ashford will not see you," he said. "Miss Ward will decide whether she will." They waited in the taxi with the meter running. The pines on either side of the gate were heavy with new snow. Gerald's hands lay in his lap, very still. Eleanor sat beside him with her handbag on her knees and her eyes forward and the expression of a woman who has arrived at a place she did not expect to reach while she still had time to reckon with it. The gate opened after 11 minutes. They were brought not into the great hall but into a small sitting room at the side of the house, a room with one low fire and 2 chairs for visitors, and a table between them and no refreshments offered. Stellan was already seated opposite when they came in. He did not stand. He gestured to the chairs with a precise and entirely unwelcoming courtesy. Mr. Voss, Mrs. Voss, my brother is not available today. My sister will decide whether she comes down. You may wait here while that is determined. He rose and left the room. Gerald lowered himself into the chair with the help of the walker. His hands had already started the shaking that had begun in the hospital and had not fully stopped. He was not crying. The crying would come later. We want to see Lily, he said. One time, just one time, to say it properly. Eleanor said nothing. She sat with her back straight, the last vestige of the posture she had maintained for 68 years, and she looked at her hands in her lap. 11 minutes later, Celeste walked in. She did not take the third chair. She took a small wingback that sat slightly apart near the window, and she sat in it with the stillness of a person who has decided in advance exactly how much space to occupy. She wore a simple gray sweater and dark trousers. No jewelry except the thin gold chain. Her hair was loose. She looked at the man on the walker and the woman with the white hair and the handbag and the straight spine, and she did not speak and she did not look away. Eleanor began to cry before a word had been spoken. Not the theatrical weeping of the courtroom. Something older and quieter. The tears came down her face without sound, and she did not wipe them away. Celeste, she said. Eleanor had not spoken her name directly in 7 years of marriage and 3 years of silence. She said it now the way a person says a word they have been afraid to use carefully, as though the saying of it costs something real. I have no defense. I have no explanation that will not sound like another cruelty in a long list of cruelties. I was wrong. I have been wrong for a very long time. Your husband would not forgive me for it. I know that. But I am old now, and Gerald is unwell, and I am asking you if there is anything left in you that can hear this. Please let me see her face. One time. Before I lose what little time I have left to lose anything. The room was very quiet. Celeste looked at the woman who had told 40 dinner guests that blood always shows. She looked at the man who had held a glass of mulled wine while his granddaughter screamed under the ice. She held the full weight of what they were and what they had done, and she did not forgive them, not in that room, not that day, because forgiveness is not a thing that can be manufactured on demand. And Celeste Ward had never in her life performed an emotion she did not actually have. But she rose from the wingback chair, and she went to the door, and she opened it and spoke softly into the corridor. Lily came in. She wore a soft dove gray dress and white tights and black Mary Janes. Her hair had grown out in the weeks since the ice. She walked without the cane. She stopped 3 feet from the table and looked at her grandparents with a face that was not a 7-year-old's face, and was not a forgiving face, and was not an angry face. It was simply the face of someone who had looked at them for a long time and had finished looking. Gerald made a sound. Lily did not move toward him. She stood where she was and regarded him with the quiet attention of someone gathering the last of what they need before they speak. Then she reached into the pocket of her gray dress and produced a small, folded square of pale blue wool. Celeste's breath stopped. She had not known Lily still had it. She had assumed in the chaos of Christmas Eve and the hospital and everything that had followed that the scarf had been left behind on the marble table where Eleanor had placed it. She had not asked. She had not wanted to open that particular wound. Lily had kept it. She had carried it from the apartment on West Wrightwood in her school bag, and she had kept it through the hospital and the estate and the new school and the new room with the 4-poster bed, and she had brought it out now at the moment she had apparently been waiting for. She stepped forward and placed it gently on the table between the 2 chairs. "Grandma, I brought it back for you." Her voice was clear and small and entirely steady. "The night of your birthday party, when you put my gift on the marble table without opening it, I thought it meant you hated me. I thought it meant I was not enough, that I had not done the right thing, that there was some version of me that would have been worth opening. I have been thinking about it for a long time, especially at night." She paused, not for effect, because she was working through something difficult and she was doing it honestly, which was how she did everything. "I do not think that anymore. I think you just never learned how to love anybody that way. I think no one ever taught you. And I am sorry for that, because it must have been very lonely." She looked at the scarf on the table between them. "I am giving it back to you. I hope that one day you find someone you love enough to open their present, the way I wanted you to open mine, to open. Eleanor Voss folded forward over her own knees and made a sound that no person who had known her for 40 years would have recognized as belonging to her. It came from somewhere she had sealed off so long ago that even she had forgotten the lock was there. It came from the place where the woman she might have been still lived, behind the pearls and the silk and 68 years of practiced imperviousness. Gerald used the walker to lower himself from the chair. Slowly, with great effort, with the full visible weight of what it cost him, he knelt on the sitting room floor in front of a 7-year-old girl. His voice broke on the first word and did not recover. Sweetheart, I am so sorry. I am sorry for everything I did not do, every phone call I did not answer, every time I looked past you to someone else. I am sorry. Lily shook her head, very gently, without cruelty. Grandpa, please do not kneel. I do not want to hate anybody. I just do not want to hate anybody. That is all I wanted you to know. She looked at them both for one more moment with that clear, completed gaze. Then she turned and walked out of the sitting room door, past the threshold, down the corridor, toward the sound of the house with a limp so faint that in 2 months no one watching her would know it had ever been there. Celeste stood. She looked at Eleanor, still folded over her knees, one hand closed around the pale blue square of wool. She looked at Gerald on the floor with the walker beside him and the tears on his face. She looked at the table between them and the fire and the small room that held them all. When she spoke, her voice held nothing cruel and nothing forgiving. It held the simple truth of a woman who has decided exactly what she is leaving behind. Margaret, Gerald, I hope the rest of your lives are peaceful. Please do not try to find us again. She walked out and pulled the door closed behind her. The taxi was waiting at the gate. It was snowing again, the soft, accumulating kind that sticks to wool coats and collects on eyelashes. Gerald walked down the stone steps on the walker. Eleanor walked beside him with one hand on his elbow. She was holding the blue scarf in her other hand against her chest, the way a person holds something they have just been given and are afraid to put down. They did not speak in the taxi. They looked like what they were: an old man, an old woman, alone in the back of a key going somewhere smaller than where they had come from. The driver did not look at them. The snow came down on the windows and the city went quiet around them, and the gold lights of the estate disappeared behind the pines. They were not wicked people who had been punished by a righteous story. They were people who had made the choices available to them and had made them badly for a long time without sufficient imagination about who else those choices were landing on. That is a different kind of tragedy. It is quieter and more common and harder to redeem. Eleanor looked at the scarf in her hands the entire way back to Wicker Park. The months that followed moved away. Months move when the worst of something is over faster than they should and full of ordinary details that accumulate into something larger without announcing themselves. Prescott was arraigned on federal kidnapping charges in the second week of January. His attorney requested bail 3 times. It was denied 3 times. He was remanded pending trial. Bellamy left Chicago for Miami in February with a rolling carry-on and a plan that fell apart 4 months later when federal investigators in the Southern District of Florida filed wire fraud charges against her. Fletcher Mafia was placed with Gerald's younger sister, a woman named Ruth, who lived outside Burlington, Vermont, and ran a small inn with 12 rooms and a dog named Corporal and a kitchen that smelled permanently of maple syrup and wood smoke. Ruth had not spoken to the Voss family in 11 years and had strong feelings about children being raised by people who could be trusted with them. Fletcher arrived with 3 suitcases and a Rolex watch and a look on his face that Ruth recognized from years of receiving guests who had been somewhere difficult and needed somewhere safe. She took the Rolex and put it in a drawer and gave him a pair of rubber boots and a job feeding the chickens. He objected for approximately 4 days. Then he stopped objecting. In February, he sat at Ruth's kitchen table after dinner with a piece of lined paper and a pencil and wrote a letter in handwriting that had the careful deliberateness of someone who understands they are saying something that matters. He wrote, "I was not kind to you. I have been thinking about why, and I think I pushed you because my mother was pushing me all the time, and I did not understand until now that the feeling I was passing on was hers and not mine. I am sorry that it landed on you. You did not deserve it. You do not have to write back." Lily read the letter at breakfast on a Thursday. She read it twice. Then she folded it carefully and put it in the tin that used to hold the $43 which she now kept on the shelf of her new room for things she considered worth keeping. That afternoon, she wrote back, "Fletcher, I forgive you. I forgave you a long time ago, actually. I just did not have an address for you. Please be happy wherever you are. Please be kind to the next person you meet who has less than you. That is the only thing I will ever ask of you. Lily Ward." Every month without fail, a cashier's check arrived in the mailbox of the residential hotel in Wicker Park. $3,200. No name on the envelope. Eleanor knew from the first month whose hand had sent it. She had never called to ask. She had never called at all. She cashed the check each month at the hotel's front desk and used it to pay the room and buy groceries and take Gerald to his cardiac follow-up appointments on the bus. Gerald had a second cardiac event in the third week of February. He did not survive it. The funeral was very small. A priest, a few people who had worked at Voss Group for a long time, Eleanor and Ruth, who drove down from Vermont and sat beside her sister-in-law without speaking and did not leave until the following morning. Celeste did not go to the funeral. She sent flowers without a card. Eleanor received them and knew who they were from and set them on the windowsill of the Wicker Park room until the petals fell. On the first day of April, the dogwoods along Michigan Avenue came into bloom. By the second week, they were at their peak, that white. That is almost not a color, almost just the intensification of light. Lily was 8 years old now and had grown nearly 3 inches since the autumn, and her ponytail swung when she ran, which she did constantly and without apology, the limp entirely gone, the leg entirely hers again. She had 6 friends at Northgate Academy, real ones, the kind established through daily negotiations and shared lunches, and the slow accumulation of having been seen on an ordinary day. Wren Aldridge was the first among them and remained the most constant, and they sat together every morning at the window desk and shared clementines at recess and argued cheerfully about the plot of the detective story Lily was writing in the marbled composition notebook she kept in her blazer pocket. The story was about a girl detective named Ellie who solved mysteries with the help of a large rabbit named Captain. The rabbit's primary investigative technique was sitting on suspects until they confessed. Lily found this both practical and satisfying as a narrative device. Bowen stood at the dismissal gate every afternoon without exception. He had done so every single school day since January. He did not look at his phone while he waited. He watched corners and reflections and the movement of people on the street beyond the gate, and he would go on doing it for as long as it was needed, and probably for some years after it stopped being needed, because some habits become something more than habits, and he did not examine the distinction too closely. The Lily Ward Foundation opened its Beacon Street office on the 15th of February in a corner suite with 2 windows and a reception desk and a coat rack by the door. Celeste had painted the reception wall herself the week before, a pale, warm white, the color of something beginning. The name was on the door in clean letters. She had put it there herself with a level and 2 screws and a sense of ceremony that she kept entirely private. By the end of the first quarter, 211 children across the greater Chicago area had received assistance through the foundation, 44 full educational scholarships, 73 medical support grants, 61 stable housing placements in partnership with organizations that had been doing the work for years and simply needed the capital to do more of it. The Chicago Tribune ran a profile in March. The journalist who wrote it spent 2 hours with Celeste at the Beacon Street office and described her afterward as someone who speaks about the work the way an architect speaks about load-bearing walls, which was the most accurate thing anyone had written about Celeste Ward in several years. She framed the article for Lily's bedroom wall, not for her own office. Lily's bedroom wall, where Lily could see it every morning when she woke up and understand in the way that children understand things that are shown rather than explain what her name was being used to build. Roman ran the Ashford family enterprises through the spring with the methodical momentum of a man who has decided on a direction and is moving in it without looking back. Stellan closed the gray chapters one by one, the way a person goes through a house before moving out of it thoroughly and without sentiment, making certain everything is in order. The real estate portfolio in 3 cities, the technology fund, the chain of cancer imaging clinics that had opened 4 locations and charged on a sliding scale that meant the cost was proportional to what a patient actually had. These were not performances of legitimacy. They were the actual thing, built to last, built to be handed on. On a Saturday afternoon in the middle of April, Celeste drove north on Sheridan Road with Lily in the passenger seat, a bunch of white tulips wrapped in paper on the back seat. Forest Hill Cemetery sat back from the road in a neighborhood of old trees and quiet streets. The kind of place that has been absorbing the city's history for so long, it has begun to look like the landscape it holds. Celeste had been coming here every spring since she found the grave 6 years ago before Thomas. Before any of this, a young woman who had been told her father's death was a car accident and had spent years looking for a headstone and had found one finally through a veterans assistance organization that tracked unmarked federal service deaths. The stone was granite simple, James Elliott Ward, 1959 to 2011. Husband, father, public servant. He chose the harder thing. That last line had not been put there by the government. Celeste had paid for it herself 3 years ago when she finally knew enough of the story to know what it should say. Lily knelt beside the stone and placed the white tulips at its base. She pressed her small palm flat against the granite, which was warm from the afternoon sun, warmer than it should have been in April. She closed her eyes. Grandpa, I never got to meet you. I have thought about that a lot, about what it would have been like to know you, and I think you would have read to me, and I think you would have argued with me about everything, and I think I would have liked that a lot. I know you were the best man in the whole world because you saved Uncle Roman when he had nothing left, and Uncle Roman saved Mama and me when we had nothing left. I am going to spend my life trying to do that for other people. I know you know that already, but I wanted to say it out loud here so that you know I mean it. She opened her eyes. When I grow up, I am going to help people, I promise. Celeste knelt beside her daughter and kissed the crown of her head. She did not hide the tears on her face. She had stopped hiding them in this place specifically some years ago. This was the one place in the world where she was allowed to be exactly the size of her grief and her gratitude simultaneously, and she used that permission every year. They stayed for a while, the two of them in the afternoon light among the old stones. Then Lily stood and took her mother's hand, and they walked back along the gravel path toward the car. Halfway down the path, under a cherry tree in full bloom, 4 men were standing. Roman in a dark suit, no tie, his hands folded in front of him. Stellan to his right, slightly forward, because Stellan's instinct was always to be slightly forward. Rafferty with a small paper bag from the bakery on Maple Street, where Lily had once told him that the almond croissants tasted like a special occasion. Bowen at the back, his eyes moving over the cemetery grounds in the automatic arc that was now simply the way he saw any space. The cherry tree above them was at the peak of its season, and the breeze was moving through it, and the petals were coming down in the way of cherry petals in April. Not falling exactly, but drifting, moving sideways and downward, landing on the shoulders of dark wool coats, settling on the gravel path between them all. Celeste stopped walking. She looked at the 4 men standing under the tree in a rain of white petals, and she thought about the hospital floor and the locket and the 3 seconds of breath on a voicemail she had never deleted, and she thought about her father in a safe house on the south side telling a young man that he still had time to choose, and she thought about a tin with $43 in it and a blue scarf on a marble table and the long journey from one to the other. She thought about what her daughter had said to her one night before Christmas in the clear, unhurried voice of a child who has arrived at a truth by thinking it through carefully and completely. Family is the people who choose to stay. She looked at the 4 men. She looked at her daughter beside her holding her hand. Lily was already moving, pulling gently forward, pulling toward the tree and the petals and the men who had driven to a cemetery on a Saturday afternoon because she had been here. And she looked up at her mother as she pulled, with her face full of the late April light, with everything she had concluded about the world written plainly on her features. Mama, come on, let us go. Celeste Ward took a breath that went all the way down, the kind that does not require any effort at all, the kind that simply fills the space that has been waiting for it. She tightened her hand around her daughter's small fingers, and they walked forward together toward the cherry tree and the white petals and the 4 men who had chosen in their various ways on their various nights to stay.